The story of Saul is rather sad, and it is one of the Bible's disappointments. At 30 years old, Saul ascended to the throne with great promise. The final account of Saul's life, on the other hand, is one of disappointment. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. It didn't take long for Saul's personal and spiritual flaws to surface, to his detriment and the detriment of Israel. He was an impatient and impulsive person who made poor decisions under duress and then attempted to justify himself rather than admitting his mistakes. As a new king, Saul would need a standing army to deal with the military threats he would face, including the persistent Philistines. Jonathan, Saul's son, was a brave soldier like his father and would eventually become David's friend, protector, and advocate in Saul's court. While Saul was gathering his troops, Jonathan carried out a raid on a Philistine garrison. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in the caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." When the Israelites saw the enemy horde, they hid behind or under any rock they could find. Some even crossed the Jordan to the east side's safety. Saul and his army had assembled at Gilgal, the site of their previous great victory, but they too were gripped by fear. Previously, Saul and Samuel appeared to have agreed that the king would wait for Samuel to arrive and offer the appropriate sacrifices in order to obtain the Lord's assistance in victory. But tired of waiting, Saul sinned by usurping the priestly role. Samuel arrived, assessed the situation, and asked ominously, "What have you done?" At least to him, Saul's explanation sounded plausible. He was a military commander with a deserting army, a massive enemy who could pounce at any time, and a priest who was nowhere to be found on the final day of their agreed-upon waiting period. Besides, Saul claimed, he really wanted God's favor, so he'd forced himself to do something he knew he shouldn't. In other words, Saul was clearly hoping that Samuel could see and understand his predicament. After all, it was Samuel who was late. Excuses didn't work, and at this early stage of his reign, Saul forfeited his right to be Israel's king. This is an interplay between God's sovereignty and human responsibility. Furthermore, we know that the leader would eventually be from the tribe Judah. Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 10. "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." However, Saul was still accountable for his actions and could have received God's blessing on his reign. "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin,